What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I thought I would go ahead and try to finish off this top 10 power forwards listing. So just to do a brief recap, of course, at number 10, I had Dolph Schayes at number 9, Kevin McHale, number 8. I had Dan Essel, number 7, Elvin Hayes at number 6, Dirk Nowitzki, number 5, Kevin Garnett. At number 4, Bob Pettit. And at number 3, Sir Charles Barkley. So at number 2, I have a guy that used to be, in my opinion, in most people's opinion, the greatest power forward of all time, Karl Malone. All right, Karl Malone now is number 2 on my list. Karl Malone, the second leading all-time scorer with 36,928 points, and he did this over a 19-year span in the NBA. Karl Malone was a great dominant scorer. He was not a great low post scorer, but Karl Malone was very effective in scoring the basketball using the mid range, especially as he got older. He developed a very effective fall away jumper as he reached age 30 and past that. His probably best years in the NBA, to me, well, shit, really, honestly, I'd say from 1989 all the way to 1999 are his best years. But as far as team success, his best years in the NBA with Utah Jazz were in the late 1990s. Carmelo was, I would say, maybe an average to slightly above average defensive player. He was not a lockdown defensive player. He was maybe an average rebounder, not a dominating rebounder. Usually around 10 to 11 boards per game. Um, Strong as an ox. One of the strongest players, not only in the NBA during his time, but one of the strongest players in the history of the NBA. I believe he could bench press. I used to know the number off the top of my head. I think he used to be able to bench press in his prime something like 450 pounds, maybe 460. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was somewhere in that range. He was a gym rat. Was no PED usage for Karl Malone that he played. He was a gym rat. He would spend about 5 to 6 hours in the gym every day, 6 days a week. You know, um, I think of a guy that had incredible longevity, except for his last year with the Lakers when he hurt his leg. Other than that season, he almost never got injured. The few games he did miss outside the 2003 2004 season, um, you know, half of those games that he missed were due to suspensions. And he, with John Stockton, of course, formed probably the most, or one of the most iconic duos, and probably the most long-lived uh, twosomes in NBA history. Stockton and Malone. You knew what was going to happen, but you couldn't stop it. And Utah, initially with Frank Layden, but especially later on with Jerry Sloan, the late Jerry Sloan, they were one of the top teams in the NBA, especially in the Western Conference in the 1990s. I would even argue that I thought that they had some of the most toughest matchups in the playoffs of any team in that era, generally speaking. They never benefited from injuries from the opposition. They almost never had an opponent that was easy. Usually, it was a difficult road for Utah, you know. But when they did have their window of opportunity in the late 1990s, unfortunately, they ran into Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls, and they just couldn't get over the hump. They just couldn't get over the hump against the Bulls. But Karl Malone, let's talk about him. All right, so Karl Malone was born in Summerfield, Louisiana in 1963. He was the youngest of 9 children. Unfortunately, when Karl Malone was just 3 years old, his father committed suicide. Okay, this is something that Karl Malone did not publicly uh, express or reveal until 1994. As a boy, this is the days before PlayStations and this is before PS5s and PS4s and PS3s and PS2s and PlayStations and Super Nintendos and Sega Genesis. You know what I'm saying? When Karl Malone was dead broke, he couldn't even picture this. Even before Ataris, Nintendos. So back then, Karl Malone wanted to have a good time. Guess what he did? He went out and worked on the farm, or maybe played as a little boy, maybe hide and go seek. Um, he would go hunt when he got a little older and would go fishing. That was Karl Malone's idea of having a good time. Now, as he got older, became an older boy, apparently there was another thing he did to have a good time, and I'll talk about that later on. But when Karl Malone was in high school, he started in Summerfield High School as a basketball player, and he was a very dominant player and received honors. And because of this, um, the notoriety he got because as a basketball player, he actually had an opportunity to play under the great late Eddie Sutton with Arkansas, but instead he chose to stay by in nearby Louisiana Tech, and he did not play basketball his rookie year because he was academically ineligible. But his sophomore, junior, and senior year, he starred with Louisiana Tech, and because of his uh, dominance as a basketball player, he was selected in the 1985 draft 13th overall by the Utah Jazz. Now, before I go further, I want to address one thing I know is gonna pop up in the comment section. Yes, Karl Malone did something that in today's climate would put him in prison. Okay, when he was in college at Louisiana Tech, he was involved in a relationship with a 12-year-old girl. At the time, I think Karl Malone was maybe 21, 22, somewhere in that range. Um, the only thing I can kind of say is not explaining it, his behavior, uh, but it's explaining the pattern of this behavior that you see back then. Elvis Presley, of course, was 25 years old when he married his wife Priscilla when she was 14 years old. This was something you often saw in the South. In the South, you often saw great poverty. Remember, Karl Malone was one of 9 children. I'm pretty sure he didn't grow up like Rockefeller. Um, when you grow up in the South, in a rural area with extreme poverty, oftentimes the family, if they saw that a suitor for their daughter was a person who looked like he was on his way to uh, financial success in some way, whether he owned his own business or whether he was going to have a great, great job waiting for him, if he was in college, which back then almost guaranteed he should have a great job, or in Karl Malone's situation, you're an NBA prospect who's on the verge of signing a probably multi-million dollar contract, then your family's gonna you know look at you like you know they're gonna be like, oh, let the young man in, but Greg, she's only 12. You know, you know, you know, you know. You know how that is. I'm not condoning it by no means. Um, but that's something that you often saw back then in the South, in the world, and in this country in general. Um, Karl Malone also has a reputation for being an absent parent. I think there was a son from a prior relationship that he did not acknowledge, and I think they're on speaking terms now. But for many years, Karl Malone did not even acknowledge his kid. All right. So I want to say this too, though. Before everybody starts shitting on Karl Malone, Larry Bird had a similar situation where there was a daughter he did not acknowledge at all because he didn't have a good relationship with the mother. Now, look, the daughter had nothing to do with the fact that Larry Bird doesn't get along with the mother. He should not have spite do that to the daughter because he don't get along with the mother. So I just want to say that, you know what I'm saying? If y'all want to shit on Karl Malone, that's fine. Let's keep it 100. All right, so Karl Malone joins the Utah Jazz, and this is the Adrian Dantley era of the Utah Jazz, but it's coming to an end. All right, it's coming to an end. That particular season when he joined them, the Utah Jazz were 42 and 40. They went 42 and 40 that year. Karl Malone would average almost 15 points and 9 rebounds per game and shoot nearly 50% from the floor. But when Karl Malone first joined the NBA, he was an atrocious foul shooter, very Shaq-like, and he only shot 48% from the foul line his rookie year. He shared minutes at the power forward position with Thurl Bailey, and when he first got there, John Stockton, who was in his second year, was not the starting point guard. It was a guy named Ricky Green. And that year, they lost in the first round to the Dallas Mavericks. That was the Dallas Maverick team that had guys like Derek Harper and Rolando Blackman and Mark Aguirre, Brad Davis. That was James Donaldson. That was that version of the Dallas Mavericks. Roy Tarpley, I think, was there by then. The next year, Frank Layden is still the coach, but now Adrian Dantley's gone, traded to the Detroit Pistons. Now this year, Karl Malone steps up. He averages 21.7 points, 10.4 rebounds, 1.9 assists, 1.3 blocks. He shoots 51% from the floor, and now he's shooting 60% from the foul line. So he's getting better. Okay, his teammate that year, Mark Eaton, who averaged 7.7 points, 8.8 rebounds, and 4.1 blocks per game. I believe it was the year prior where he set the record for blocks per game with 5.6 points, the official record at least, with 5.6 blocks per game. I think it was that year. Although actuality, the blocks record most likely probably belongs to a guy like Will Chamberlain. Um, John Stockton was beginning to play more minutes, but Ricky Green was still the starting point guard at that time. But he was sharing minutes with John Stockton at the point guard position, even though Ricky Green was still the starter. And that year they lost in the first round to the Golden State Warriors. I think that Warriors team had guys like I think that team had like guys like Purvis Short and Eric Sleepy Floyd on it. Now the next year, the 87-88 season, would be the coming out party for Stockton and Malone. The coach was Frank Layden that year. Um, they went 47 and 35. By this time, John Stockton was the starter, and he was averaging 14.7 points to go along with 13.8 assists and 3 steals per game. Karl Malone played in all 82 games and averaged 27.7 points per game. I believe this is the first year that he was an all-star. He averaged 12 rebounds per game to go along with 2.4 assists per game and 1.4 steals. Karl Malone shot 52% from the floor in 39 minutes of play, and he shot 70% from the foul line. So he had drastically improved his foul shooting by then. This particular year, they went all the way to the conference semifinals, going 7 games with the eventual Los Angeles Lakers. All right, so they played Portland in the first round and beat them, and in the next round they went 7 games with Los Angeles Lakers. And I'm pretty sure, as we all know, the reason why they was able to go 7 games with Lakers is because of the fact that the Lakers really probably didn't have anybody that could cover Karl Malone. Um, John Stockton probably gave Magic Johnson problems, obviously, and they were younger. You know what I'm saying? They were much younger. It's a trip watching Karl Malone when he was young. He ran like a gazelle up and down the court when he was younger. The very next season, early on in the season, Frank Layden stepped down as the coach, and Jerry Sloan took over. For the season, they won 51 games, and they made the playoffs, but they lost in the first round to the Golden State Warriors with no pushovers. Now, during this season, Karl Malone averaged 29.1 points per game, going on with 10.7 rebounds, 2.7 assists, and 1.8 steals per game. Karl Malone shot 50% from the floor and 77% from the foul line. So, over the next couple of years, because I don't want to have to go through every year, over the next couple of years, it was more of the same. All right, Karl Malone putting up big numbers. I think in 89-90, he averaged 31 points a game, which was second to Jordan's 33.6. That year, he established a career high 61 points. It was a blowout win against Milwaukee Bucks. I think he had 61 points, only 33 minutes of play in that game, too. So if he was padding his numbers, he could have scored 70 plus points or 80 points if he wanted to. Utah was a team that was perennially winning 50 games a year, but they just couldn't get over the hump. They couldn't get over, the Portland Trailblazers or the Phoenix Suns or the Seattle Supersonics or the Denver Nuggets or Houston or whoever. They just couldn't get past these teams, you know. And the roster changed, even though the dynamic with Karl Malone and John Stockton stayed the same. But the roster changed over the years. You saw Mark Eaton eventually retire. You saw Daryl Duncan. You saw Dr. Duncanstein eventually retire. Jeff Malone, who was acquired from the then Washington Bullets. Um, he came in the early '90s or late '80s, I think early '90s, but ultimately he retired or left and then retired. I think he played with Miami Heat or something one year. Um, by the mid 2000s, I remember in 1996, they were in the Western Conference Finals. They're playing the Sonics, and they go all the way to 7 games, but they just uh, didn't have any answers for that particular Sonic team. I remember Sean Kemp having an excellent Game 7. I remember him dunking on Antoine Carr in that game, not ML Carr. And you just kind of thought to yourself, wow, at the time, Karl Malone was 33, Stockton was 34. You said, you know what, man, this team, I think it's over for them. The Sonics are up and coming. The Lakers were up and coming with Shaq and Kobe, even though Kobe was very young. But Eddie Jones, Nick Van Exel. You thought to yourself, yeah, I think Utah's run is over, man. They were a really good team, but I think their run is over. But they had other plans. Okay. 1996-97 season, Karl Malone by then had really worked on his game to the point where he had very few weaknesses. He had really mastered that mid-range fall-away jumper that he could shoot out to 17 or even 18 feet. Um, John Stockton wasn't the force that he once was, but he was comfortable in his role through repetition. Karl Malone knew every nook and cranny. He knew how to guard players. Like, you know what I'm saying? He had been around so long that he knew everybody's fucking tendencies. And, you know, he had mastered the mental aspect of the game by then. Even if physically he was falling apart slowly. Karl Malone, because of his incredible work ethic and workout regimen, was able to retain his game for so goddamn long. You know what I'm saying? 96, 97, Utah won a franchise record 64 games, which in any other season would have been highly lauded, but they still finished second in seeding overall to the Chicago Bulls, who won 69 games. But Karl Malone won the MVP award, you know, something that had eluded him. And when Utah faced the Houston Rockets in the Western Conference Finals that year, I thought Houston was going to win. I just thought Houston was a more talented team, even though I know sometimes their age showed up at times. But Utah proved to be the more mentally tough team. Okay, um, ultimately they overcame a 13-point deficit late in the fourth quarter of Game 6. John Stockton hit the biggest shot of his career and sent the Utah Jazz to the NBA Finals. And that was one hell of a finals, man. It's one hell of a finals. It went 6 games, but ultimately Chicago prevailed. But Utah came right back the very next year. They won 62 games, the same as the Chicago Bulls. But because they swept Chicago in their season matchup, they had the home court advantage to start the playoffs. And this was key because the year prior, Chicago had home court advantage. And in fact, the first game of the 98 finals, after a very grueling, I'm going to tell you something. I really feared that we were going to lose to Utah in 1998. The reason why, number one, they had home court advantage this time over 97. And also, Chicago Bull fans, you remember this, they swept the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. They swept them. So they were very well rested. Remember, these were two of the oldest teams in the NBA. And Utah was very well rested after that sweep. Chicago was drained after that 7-game series with Indiana. This was a series that most Bulls fans thought was only going to go maybe 5, maybe 6 games, but it was a grueling, agonizing 7-game series, which we barely, and I mean barely finished. And I could look at the body language of the Bulls and I could see fatigue. And for the first time, I thought the Bulls were going to lose. And in fact, we lost the first game of the finals. But miraculously, games 2, 3, and 4 went to Chicago. I think it was game 3 that was a blowout. One of them, games 3 or 4, was a blowout. We beat them 96-54. And it looked like it was going to be a coronation at home in game 5. But guess what? Karl Malone had other plans. Karl Malone said, I'm not going to allow my team to lose here in Chicago. And Karl Malone came out. I still remember it like yesterday. He made his first 6 shots. He destroyed Dennis Rodman in that series, by the way. Um, en route to a 39-point game, and he damn near by himself won that game for the Utah Jazz. The scene shifts to Utah. They're loud. They're pumped up. They're animated. And like I said, what was once a feeling of jubilation at the beginning of Game 5 now was a sense of dread because I knew this. If we didn't beat them in Game 6, it was over. I had no confidence that we were going to beat them in the seventh game. None. So what I saw was, and fear turned into terror when I saw Scottie Pippen get injured in Game 6 early on. Re-aggravated his back injury. So really, Jordan was out there by himself. So you saw Jordan and Malone battling back, scoring wise, and I just didn't think Mike had enough in him. And I'm telling you, the reason why a lot of people look at Jordan with such adulation as a basketball player is because of that series, and in particular because of that game. Because I don't know if any other player, except for maybe a guy like Kobe or Bird or somebody of that rare air, would have been able to pull off what he pulled off. But he pulled it off, and Michael Jordan damn near single-handedly down the stretch of that fourth quarter won the game for Chicago and took the championship away from Utah. And had that been, I'll put it like this: had Michael Jordan been, and I don't mean to be disrespectful saying this, but if Michael Jordan had been LeBron James, and with LeBron James' tendency to pass the ball in that situation, I think Chicago would have lost and Utah would have won the championship. You know what I'm saying? But even though their window of opportunity was closed, Karl Malone and John Stockton still had many more productive years ahead of them. In their abbreviated 50-game schedule, Karl Malone won the league MVP. I think a lot of politics was involved in that one. I think that was like a makeup award for losing to Jordan in the finals. Because if you actually look at the season, I thought the MVP award should have went to maybe somebody like Alonzo Mourning, who had the best season of his career, or it should have went to Tim Duncan, or it should have went to Chris Webber, who had a career year, especially rebounding. He led the NBA in rebounding, or it could have went to maybe Shaq or Iverson. I have no idea why they gave it to Karl Malone. But over the next couple of years, Karl Malone would still be a productive player. But you could tell Utah was diminishing as a team, no longer getting to the conference finals, even the semis. Now starting to lose in the first round to the better up and coming teams now, like the Dallas Mavericks, the Sacramento Kings, or whoever. They were losing to these new generation of teams. And after the 2002-2003 season, John Stockton retired. Karl Malone still wanted to play one more year, and he went to the Lakers, as well as an aging Gary Payton. And what on paper looked like a super team, in reality didn't quite work out that way. Karl Malone suffered the first major injury of his career. I don't remember the specific injury, but it was some type of injury to his leg or his knee, and it hampered his play. You could clearly see he wasn't the same player. Gary Payton really wasn't the same player, and there was also tension between Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, and I believe injuries to Shaq, Karl Malone, and I think that they're playing, in my opinion, I think they're playing too much outside in rather than inside out basketball. But they went up against a great historically great defensive team in the Detroit Pistons, and ultimately they lost 4 games to 1 to the Detroit Pistons in one of the huge upsets in finals history. And subsequently, Karl Malone retired from basketball. But when he retired, Karl Malone had accumulated 36,928 points, which made him second all time in scoring. He's still second all time in scoring. Uh, he grabbed 14,968 rebounds and dished out 5,238 assists for career averages of 25 points, 10.1 rebounds, and 3.6 assists per game. He's the all-time leader, and I believe I'm not mistaken, he's the all-time leader in free throws made and attempted, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely in made. I think he's the all-time leader in attempted too. He's a two-time league MVP, as I said, 97 and 99, 14-time NBA All-Star, two-time NBA All-Star Game MVP, 89 and 93, 11-time All-NBA First Team, two-time All-NBA Second Team, All-NBA Third Team in 2001, three-time NBA All-Defensive First Team, NBA All-Defensive Second Team, NBA All-Rookie First Team in '86. His number 32 retired by the Utah Jazz. He was on the NBA's 50th anniversary All-Time Team, second team All-American in ABC 1985, Southland Player of the Year in 1983, and his number 32 retired by the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs. He won Olympic gold in Barcelona in 1992 on the Dream Team. He also won Olympic gold in 1996 on the Olympic team in Atlanta, or Dream Team 2, one of the greatest players of all times, and in my opinion, the second greatest power forward in the history of the game, the mailman, Karl Malone.